Hello and welcome back to the channel. Folks, we got a good one today. This is going to be Macedon versus Rome. And this was actually a matchup that did happen historically. Yes, that's right. Maybe more than once, but the one that I'm familiar with, of course, is the Battle of Cynocephalae. I don't remember everything about it. It took place in 197 BC in Thessaly. And I believe the Roman leader was Titus Flaminius. He had like a weird name. And then, of course, you had Philip V of Macedon. And it was an interesting battle. Both armies were moving to face off against each other, and the numbers were roughly even, if I remember right, though interestingly enough, the Romans had some war elephants in tow that I'm assuming they'd picked up from other battles. Of course, they had recently defeated Carthage in the Second Punic War, and that may have been where they picked some of that up from Africa. But yeah, so they were coming up against about 16,000 phalangists, and the Romans had about the same equivalent in terms of their legions. In terms of heavy infantry, I believe the Romans had a little bit more light infantry. The cavalry numbers were pretty close. I think that the Macedonians had about 2,000 cavalry. And so it was relatively even numbers. And interesting enough, on this battlefield, there's a big hill here. And that was actually the crux of the battle. I believe the morning of the battle, there had been some weather. There was a lot of mud down in the fields and the low-lying lands, I think, where Macedon would have done better to engage with all their phalangists, and some scouting took place up in the hills around Cynocephalae, where some engagements started to break out between the Romans and the Macedonians, and reinforcements continued to be sent, and ultimately Philip V sent his phalangist up into the broken terrain in the hills and ended up suffering a massive defeat to the Romans. The Romans took away a key victory there. In that terrain, his phalangists were not able to perform the way is intended. Now, we are not going to see phalangists here for Macedon, and I'm not surprised because they are very difficult to use, in Rome too. But there you go, a little fun background and history on the Macedonian and Rome matchups. Now, if I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me, add more to it if you want. Talk about other meetings between the two. Macedon and Carthage actually allied during the Punic War, though there wasn't a very effective coordination between the two, and that would have been a very interesting alliance had it been well coordinated. That could have been extraordinarily dangerous for Rome. But the trick to these Macedonian armies, obviously, was taking the battle when and where they should, something that Hannibal was actually quite good at. That's actually his main success, was being able to take the battles when and where he wanted to. And you'll notice that when he had to take a battle that he did not want to, like in North Africa against Scipio Africanus, he lost. So something that Alexander the Great no doubt was familiar with as well, when he found so much success with his army. Now anyway, let's talk about this battle for Macedon up front. We got some mercenary Rhodian slingers. These are very dangerous slingers. They are paired with 2 units of standard slingers. And then cavalry-wise, the Macedonians do have an ace up their sleeve here with the Thessalian cavalry. Very effective shot cavalry for its price. They are just an excellent cavalry unit. They don't do as well in a prolonged melee because they're shot cavalry, but they hit like a tank on the charge. I mean, they absolutely blow apart lower armored units and are really effective even into heavy units at the right time. The Romans are using what looks to be a Primarian army here. We've got Hastati up front, Principe in a second line, Succi Equites Extraordinari. There are some auxiliary Balearic slingers, which would not be impossible here for the Romans, even in this Primarian army, and there's some Triari out on one flank. The Triari are pretty limited, which makes sense. They would have been the most well-armed and battle-hardened veterans. So a pretty solid Primarian army here with Legatus in there as well. So as far as skirmish goes, I would think the Romans have a bit of an upper hand here with these Balearic slingers. It looks like the Hastati are going to hit a Testudo formation. Not a bad idea, as it would protect them from some of the missile fire that's coming in from Macedon, though it does limit their mobility. The Equites Extraordinari, if we take a look at the match here, they are a very heavy shot cavalry, so they have more mass. And if we look at their stats here, it's 34, 25, 10, charge bonus of 57. 40, 25, 10, charge bonus of 67. So better charge on the Thessalians, better attack, and a little less mass on the Thessalians. And then armor-wise, the Equites have 20 more armor. So more heavily armored, less charge, more mass. Be curious, I don't think I would want to just go head-to-head with those Thessalians with the Equites. But the Equites are being very nicely baited here by the mercenary Thracian cavalry. So well done there for Macedon. The Roman infantry is pushing forward. I don't blame them. I mean, I would probably be looking to get an engagement as well. The Roman infantry here is far superior. It's up against only 4 thorax swords and 3 mercenary Thracians. Now, those Thracians will absolutely lay waste to the Roman infantry. Oh, look at this, a Royal Peltis general as well. And I love how it's rolling the flank with the Agrionian Axemen. This is such a cool combo here. Agrionians are a hybrid unit that are good late in the battle, and the Royal Peltist are a hybrid unit as well, who just happens to be really good in a melee if they don't get their faces blown off by a charge. And speaking of charges over here, the Hastati have entered combat with some of the thorax swords. They won't win that fight, but they can soften it nicely. These mercenary Thracian warriors are going to absolutely crap on Hastati, but the Hastati will get a lot of kills on them in return because of their lack of armor. There's some mercenary Thracian warriors here for the Macedonians charging into this Hastati that was going for the Agrionian Axemen, and then over here the Royal Peltist are going to end up engaged with some Triarii and Principe. The Royal Peltist is going to be tough here in this fight. There's a lot of Roman heavy infantry near, and there are some Agrionians for support. If those Agrionians can move over here to the flank, they could clean that up in a real hurry. Though I would expect the Royal Peltist to hold their own fairly well there. More Principe heading in. And it looks like they are moving in now, so Rome really throwing around the weight of its heavy infantry, while the Thessalians, meanwhile, get into the auxiliary Balearic slingers. That is not great for Rome, as their cavalry had been distracted by the mercenary Thracians. Those Thracians are a risk in melee as well, so the Romans would do well to keep an eye on them. Meanwhile, Macedon pulls its slingers back, keeps them safe, and starts pouring in support fire from over here in the woods, and some of these Agrionians get away, as well as this mercenary Thracian, which could now put a brutal rear charge into this Principe if they so choose. Yes, they choose. So the Principes would have done well to not turn their attention away from those Thracians, as they have a brutal charge, and Rome is going to pay a hefty price over here. Their Triarii are able to silence those Agrionians, but this Royal Peltist is going to get a lot of really good support here, and it will end up doing very well against these Roman legionaries. So the Agatus is now tied up against the Thessalian cavalry. It did get support from an Equite Extraordinary, but now the Thracian cavalry is kind of running amok. There's another Agrionian over here. I love these Agrionians, such cool, kind of combo units. This one got charged by an Equite, but managed to hold its own there. Thurio Spear holding against Triarii. Triarii is the better unit there. It's just that those units would take a long time to kill each other. And the Principe, probably a little bit better unit than the Thorax Sword. But because they came in, without the same kind of support here, the Thorax Swords are holding just fine. In fact, some of them broke loose from fights earlier with Hastati. So there's Roman infantry is struggling here to get the job done. Very much the opposite of what we saw at the actual Battle of Cynocephalae, where the Roman infantry just absolutely owned all day long. It's going to be a little bit different here. The Macedonian infantry has gotten really solid engagements here. Now, it's not to say the Romans haven't done well, because they certainly have with some of their units, and they certainly have the numbers there, but I would say Macedon has used its support units quite well, and in this case its slingers and Agrionian axemen have just been decimating the Roman forces over here on this flank, and I think the Romans just got a really poor value trade over here on their left, whereas the Macedonians got a pretty solid value trade. The Royal Peltis did not do amazing, but it did draw a lot of attention, and that attention was well taken care of by the slingers. Those slingers are now going to focus their efforts into the Equite Extraordinary. That is a good target for them. So Rome is running low on troops here, but we'll see what happens. I like these Agrionians are still left. I don't know if they still have javelins. It looks like they're carrying a javelin. We'll see whether they throw it. If they still have javelins, the Romans are in some serious dookie here. Ooh, the Principe are now just going to start getting sideswiped by slingers. Slingers do not run out of ammunition particularly easy, and they are going to really be devastating late in the game when you don't have an answer to it. Same thing with these Thracian cavalry, very devastating late in the game, and you don't hold any other answers. So the Roman infantry, although in my opinion probably superior here, even to the Thorax swords, the Principe were at least, they are going to be defeated just because of the combined arms here for Macedon, and well played on their part. Really cool Primarian army. The Primarian army does limit Rome. It makes them weaker for sure, so when players choose to play Primarian, it's not only cool historically themed speaking, but they are also making their life harder. So mad respect to the Roman players who do it, because not only is it cool, it also is more challenging. because the Roman post-Marian infantry in the game is just much better, especially when you're starting to talk about veteran legionaries or Evocati cohort, that type of things that are just much more dangerous. And again, these Principe weren't without their capabilities, and I think these chevrons came on the Hastati ahead of time, by the way. But I mean, they were getting some kills, but again, the support for Macedon was very well done. Thracian warriors add that extra armor piercing and charge. Agrionian axemen add some flexibility and missile support on the flanks. Their javelins are deadly against cavalry, and the Agrionians themselves are capable in a melee against a light spear unit, or into a rear charge against infantry, or in the case of this battle where we saw that a flank gets exposed, an enemy infantry flank, and then you dump the javelins into it. So a really cool support unit here. A nice build there by Hotel Soap with his victory over 3 LOY 352 here. So GG to both players. I appreciate this one. Again, kudos to, I'm just going to say 352 here. Kudos to him for playing the Primarian army. It's a really fun way to play. Like I said, it does make things tougher. But again, Macedon is not a powerhouse faction either. So I think the Primarian matchup here is a fun one because it takes these two factions and probably puts them a little closer to the same playing field. But again, Macedon, not a power faction in terms of melee or melee cavalry, but they do have a lot of really nice support tools. I think this is what makes them better than some of the other Greek factions in many ways, is they do have some decent support. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon with some more action in Total War Rome 2.